meeting. Wanted to get Hal Heemstra on the meeting so that he could give an update on the federal infrastructure planning. So Hal, it sounds like you dodged your storm on the East Coast.
I did. Nice to be with you today. Thanks. Thanks, everyone, and hello. I know some of you, I have met others, and appreciate the opportunity to visit with you for a few minutes this morning, or this afternoon, actually, on what's happening in Washington and what's happening on the infrastructure proposal. I'm sure you've been watching it in the news a lot because it's been in the news a lot. And the estimate at this point is that Congress and the Senate will finish the infrastructure bill that has a new name now. It's called A. Doesn't that roll off? So the IIJA is expected to be voted on perhaps late tonight, but probably tomorrow for a final vote in the Senate. And this bill, you see different descriptions of it. You see it described as a $550 billion bill, and you see descriptions of it as a $1 trillion bill. And primarily the reason that those descriptions are different is because the $1 trillion figure includes all the authorizations that would typically happen in transportation funding between now and 5 years from now. And so that's how they get to the $1 trillion level. And the 550 is actually new money that they are either authorizing or authorizing appropriations for between now and 5 years from now. So it doesn't mean that if this bill is passed Congress, $550 billion in additional money becomes available instantaneously. It means over the next 5 years that this funding would become available. And it's an enormous amount of money, but it also has been criticized by both conservatives and liberals. A lot of different categories. And so you don't in any category to solve whatever the problem is that they're trying to solve, whether it's high-speed rail or bridge funding or road repair or transit, whatever the issue is and the interest group that's behind that issue, they're probably disappointed that the additional $550 billion is not going to solve their problem. But $550 billion is a lot of money. I mean, $1 billion is 1,000 million. And so, you know, it starts to add up pretty significantly. I thought it might be helpful for you all to get a sense of what this really means for Oregon and what it really means for Washington on the funding level. And in Oregon under the typical reauthorization of the transportation bill would receive about $2.65 billion over the next 5 years under the FAST Act formulas. And under the formulas that are in the Senate bill, Oregon would receive $3.5 billion.
Hal, could you turn off your video? Because you kind of keep freezing up. So maybe if you, Hal, maybe you kind of keep freezing up. So maybe if you turn off your video, that'll reduce the bandwidth. Right. And
I will do that.
Other way around. There you go. And unmute yourself.
Thanks. Hopefully this will work a little better. Yeah, I'm in rural Delaware and we don't have great Wi-Fi out here. One of the things that's in the infrastructure bill is a lot of funding for increased Wi-Fi funding all over the country, and that would be helpful. So for Oregon, the bottom line is that Oregon will receive about $1.12 billion in additional funding that it had otherwise not expected to receive. And Washington State will receive about $1.85 billion in increased funding compared to a typical reauthorization bill. How that translates to bridge funding is an interesting statistic to look at. On the bridge side, Oregon over the next 5 years will receive about, assuming this legislation goes through and the House agrees, and the numbers stay pretty much the same, Oregon will receive $268 million in additional bridge funding over the next 5 years. So you hear these figures of 500 billion, and it sounds like, you know, money is just going to rain down from heaven, when in fact, the formula means that Oregon would receive 268 million in additional bridge funding. And you say, why so little compared to the big numbers that Congress is talking about? And one of the formula issues that Oregon gets dinged with is Oregon has been a pretty good steward of their bridges over the last 5 or 10 years. And the states that get the most funding are the states that have the worst conditioned bridges. So if you've been a good steward, you get penalized. And Oregon only would receive $268 million in additional bridge funding. Washington State does a little better. It gets $604 million in additional bridge funding. So between the two, 600 million for Washington State and 268 for Oregon, we're looking at about $870 million in additional bridge funding. Now, I have an idea of where some of that bridge funding should go, and I'm sure you do too. So we'll see if that all comes to play. Now is pending in the Senate to be tonight, probably tomorrow. Then it goes over to the House. I see my internet connection is unstable again. Sorry. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Off and on, yeah.
The legislation in the Senate, what ends up happening then is it will have to be passed by the House. The House is not happy with the Senate package. Chairman DeFazio from Eugene is particularly unhappy with the Senate package. He was not at the White House in the development of the infrastructure package between the White House and the Senate. He's expressed a lot of frustration with that. And there's a lot of speculation on whether or not the Democrats in the House will actually support this proposal. My guess is at the end of the day, they will, because it's seen as a signature piece of legislation for President Biden, and the Democrats are not going to go against the president on that. So in the end, I think these funds are likely to flow. Oregon and Washington get another $800 million in bridge funding, and they receive additional funds for broader transportation issues as well. That's a quick summary. I'm sorry that I keep cutting out, and I'll stop now because it's too difficult to listen to someone who cuts out.
Hal, before I open it up to the committee, can you talk a little bit about the currently existing programs like infra, the new build, the new Tiger, those programs that we've taken advantage of or are planning to take advantage of in the future? Have those been plussed up in some significant way compared to the past?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking that question, Kevin. Yes, the infrastructure proposal in the Senate does plus up the RAISE program, which is what was now called RAISE, formerly called Build, and before that it was called Tiger. It's plussed up over the next 5 years by $7.5 billion. And the infra program is plussed up with an additional 3.2 billion. So those are both discretionary funding programs that will have a lot more money. One of the interesting things about the proposal in the Senate is that a lot of this funding goes to US DOT in discretionary accounts. And so USDOT over the next 5 years will have about $105 billion in discretionary money to distribute through a variety of them, like build and raise and infrastructure. I mean, the infra program, those are a couple of the programs. They have a lot more discretionary money in transit, a lot more discretionary money in things like that. But additional tribute.
Great, thank you, Hal. Questions from the working group? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, Hal, we're trying to get on track where we get our bridge done here in the next 7 to 8 years. And as you know, we're funding constrained big time. How would you propose we go forward, and which of these pots, if not all of them, should we try to tap into? And we're probably looking for somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million.
Right. That's a great question. And I talked to Kevin a lot about whether or not there are opportunities to move forward in specific requests. You all, many of you probably signed on to the letters that the bi-state working group put forward to Senator Murray, Senator Cantwell, Senator Wyden, and Senator Merkley. And those letters were sent in early July, were really sent to just remind them that there is this bridge project, that it needs a significant amount of federal funding to actually make the numbers work, and that it's probably going to be a combination of federal funding, state funding from Washington State, and state funding from Oregon State, and probably some toll funding to put the pieces together. And I would think that at a minimum, there has to be at least $50 million from the federal government to make the numbers work, depending on what Washington and Oregon State legislatures can come up with. But they're both going to have a lot more money from this federal funding. So, you know, they'll have more discretionary funding available at the state level as well. And so there is the infra program. The infra program is designed.
You cut out.
I'm sorry. Infra program is a program on large discretionary. A big infra grant is maybe 40 million, maybe 60 million. It's not 400 million. And the build program has a statutory limitation of 25 million. You cannot get more than 25 million per project. So the build program is a good program to target for individual elements of the project, like the $5 million build grant that was recently given to the Port of Hood River for additional design work for the bridge. But it's not the way that the bridge is going to be funded. That's going to be either through a direct allocation from USDOT through their new bridge program, or perhaps through an infra program, or through federal funds that flow to WashDOT and to ODOT. And then those state DOT agencies are going to have more federal funding to distribute. And how they distribute that money is probably a pretty political process in the states, but that's where the target's going to be.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Hal? Hal, is there anything we can be doing right now to, when do you see those federal programs being available? I mean, when do you think that, do you think it'll be the next funding cycle? Like next year, do you see those applications being available?
Yes, you know, this legislation is probably not actually going to get to the president's desk until later this fall. The House is out of session now until the 20th of September. So unless they come back for a special session, even if the legislation passes the Senate today or tomorrow, it just sits until at least the 20th of September. And Speaker Pelosi has said that she will not move the infrastructure package until they vote on the bigger budget resolution and reconciliation bill, and that's going to take months to put together. So I think it's likely that we're not going to see final legislation for probably 2 or 3 months. And then once that legislation is signed into law, it takes USDOT, several months to come up with new procedures and notices of funding availability, things like that. So we're looking into next year before some of these funds begin to become available. But that doesn't mean that we should back off at all from the work that we're doing with the congressional delegation, because they seem pretty tuned in to the bridge project. And we need to keep that pressure up so that they remain tuned in.
Hey, Hal, this is Mike again. Is there a way that we could help influence the writing of the legislation? Are we totally given up on a line item project?
In the House Invest Act, they did include earmarked projects. But in the Senate, they have not included earmarked projects, and they don't intend to. So there is some speculation that when the legislation is sent from the House to the Senate, that the House might include projects, and we're keeping an eye on that. But right now, that's just speculation, and the Senate is saying that they're not going to include earmarks. And they've been pretty consistent about that. But, if that's what it takes to get this legislation over the finish line, 2 months from now, the Senate might change their mind a little bit. So we're keeping an eye on whether or not those are opportunities. And that's why the letter that was sent by the Washington and Oregon state legislative delegation, state legislature delegations, and the One Gorge letters were so helpful, because they both basically said, if you have the opportunity to do earmarks, remember this project. And
well, okay, so let's, is there a way that we can fight this on multiple fronts? We keep the pressure on the feds, like we just talked about. Is there something that we could do preemptively back in both the state of Oregon and state of Washington to increase the exposure and the need of our bridge, and maybe break this thing into two chunks? One is design, the second one being construction. And is there documents that we should be putting together now to feed into both of these entities to increase our chance of attracting some money?
Those are good suggestions, and I would think reaching out to both the members of the Oregon Transportation Commission as well as the leadership at Oregon DOT are both really critical steps at the state legislative level. The state level and in Oregon. In Washington, the state WashDOT, the state DOT, and I'm not as familiar with Washington, how Washington state makes its decisions on which projects are funded, if there's an equivalent to an Oregon Transportation Commission, if there's a Washington Transportation Commission. But if there is, now is the time to be reaching out to them, because we know that both states are going to receive more than $1 billion in additional funding from an infrastructure package that is over and above what they typically receive. So how are they going to spend that money? And everyone in the state is going to make a claim on that money, but the ones that they understand the best And the most, the ones that make the most sense just financially and kind of structurally are probably ones that are going to float to the top. And so saying we've got our FEIS completed at the end of this year, we've got our record of decision completed at the end of this year, this is the stage of the project we're in, this is what we need to move forward with our final design, and this is what we need to move forward with construction. Those are all kind of phases that the more they understand those phases, the more comfortable they're going to be in distributing some of the money. So I wouldn't wait. I would try to lay out those elements in as much detail as you can and start having those conversations now, because they're going to have a lot more money at the state DOT level than they have now.
Great. Thank you, Hal.
Let's see, Paul, any thoughts on Hal's comment? I know you weren't here to talk about federal infrastructure funding, but I'm sure you've got some sense from the Washington side how that might be perceived. Do you feel, Paul, are you?
I'm probably not the right person, but I have been seeing that Arthur's been trying to ask a question for the last 3 minutes, so maybe we better let him.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Paul. Arthur.
I appreciate you watching out for me there. Hal, I'm sure that you said this, but you used a lot of words that I may not have followed. I'm just trying to track all the dollars. And specifically, what I'm trying to understand is what percentage of the new monies are being used to plus up existing federal programs, and what percentage are going into new pots. And then when you talked about the US DOT having 100 and something, I wrote this number down.
105. Mm-hmm.
Okay, 105 billion. Yeah, there it is. 105 billion in new discretionary funds, a new pot of money. How does that new pot of money relate to the state allocations that you described? I want to be sure I'm not double counting.
The 105 billion does not relate to the formula funds that will get distributed to the states. So those are different pots of money. The 105 includes everything from transit to new discretionary bridge funding to the plus up on the RAISE program, to the plus up on infra program, to plus ups on safety programs. And so it's a wide variety, and I can share with Kevin, who can then share it with bipartisan or by state group, all the different plus ups, and you can just see them on the accounts. Most of them are the existing accounts, and then they're just plussed up, some more than others. And how it relates to opportunity. Most of the funding that will come to the state of Oregon, since you're a mayor in Oregon, most of the funding that will come to the state of Oregon is $1.12 billion increase over what they would have expected. And the way that money is added up is 268 million in bridge, 52 million for electric vehicles, and that's for like for EV charging infrastructure, things like that. 2.4 million for ferry boats, and the rest is just funding that comes in on the various formula programs that the state already gets from the federal government. So the additional money is new bridge funding, new EV funding, new ferry boat funding, and the rest is just kind of plussing up the different programs. And it adds up to $1.12 billion in additional money over what they would have expected. What they would have expected was about 2.65 billion. And now they're going to get 3.59 billion.
Great, that's really helpful. And hopefully we'll get the new bridge built before we have to tap into that ferry money that you were just talking about.
That's right. Yeah, 2.4 million is not going to go too far on ferries.
Sorry, I just had a quick question. How can we get kind of like a metric breakdown of that and on like an Excel sheet or something, just for our reference when we're talking to constituents?
Yes. I'll work with Ken, send some figures. I've already shared a few with him, but I'll work with him and we'll just put it together in a couple of charts that would be helpful to you. And
That was my ask too.
Okay, and Washington too? Sure, we can do that. And you should be aware, of course, we love our friends at ODOT and WashDOT, but they'll be resistant to you saying you want a piece of their money, because that's how they see it. They'll see it as their money. And so, you know, be very cautious about it. And I would just encourage you to talk about, you know, how excited you are about the additional funding that they're going to get out of this new infrastructure funding, and looking forward to working with them to make sure that some of it flows to the bridge.
Great. So I've got a to-do item here of getting the federal plus up breakdowns, and I'll get something from Hal and then distribute that to the working group.
And again, that's for both states.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
That being said, that last comment that Hal made, I think it's prudent as soon as possible to get, you know, some representatives from ODOT and WashDOT in front of us to talk about whether those are possibilities or not possibilities, or how we can work together or not. So I just think we should get that on the radar ASAP if that's where we're going to have to potentially go, and just figure it out sooner than later.
Okay.
I would agree. Start having those conversations now, because you know that the folks who are interested in the other Columbia River Crossing Bridge project have their eyes on that money. And so those are going to be internal conversations that happen within WashDOT and ODOT and the Oregon Transportation Commission and whatever the equivalent is in one state. And, you know, they're going to be looking at how much do they put on the Vancouver Bridge and how much do they put on this bridge and where else do they spend money. And there, as much as this money is, it's not enough to go around to everything.
All right. Any more questions for Hal? Thank you, Hal. I appreciate it. Batten down the hatches. Hopefully you won't be getting hammered by the storms too much longer.
All right, well, thank you. And I apologize for my spotty internet, but that's what rural Delaware is like.
Well, rural Oregon is sometimes in the same box. So thank you, Hal. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. So next on our agenda, we've got Miles Pengele from Thorn Run Partners. We've got a memo in the packet that talks a little bit about the Bridge Authority legislation and the process there. And so it made sense to have Miles walk the working group through the process that we're currently in. Miles, are you with us?
I am. Can everyone hear me? Great. Well, hello all. Good to see you again. I don't think I have a ton of new information for you from the July meeting, but wanted to give you a sense of what the Oregon process looks like for beginning drafting of bi-state authority legislation, because it is pretty different than the Washington process. So as Kevin referenced, and as you may have seen in the report, did introduce legislation in 2020, or excuse me, in 2021 that would have directed the bi-state working group in consultation with Port of Hood River to report to the legislature by the end of the year detailing recommendations for a bi-state governance entity for the new bridge. Representative Williams introduced that bill on behalf of the court. And as much as anything, we intended that bill to be a vehicle so we could start socializing the concept of a bi-state bridge authority with Oregon legislators in preparation for running legislation in 2022. You may also recall that the court ultimately decided not to move forward with that legislation. That was at the request of Representative McLean, who is the co-chair of both the Joint Transportation Committee as well as the Joint I-5 Bridge Committee. And her concern was that conversations about establishing a bi-state bridge authority for the new Hood River Bridge would become intertwined with an ongoing debate between Oregon and Washington legislators about whether the new I-5 bridge should be governed by a bi-state bridge authority. According to Representative McLean, that is something that Washington legislators have been pushing for, and Oregon legislators are a little less enthusiastic. And so Representative McLean agreed to be an advocate for the $5 million in funding that we secured in the 2021 session, but asked that we not push our bridge authority study bill. And we were very clear with her that if we didn't run the study bill in 2021, we would still need bridge authority legislation in 2022. She did not express concern about that. We talked to a number of legislators about the need for bi-state bridge authority legislation during the 2021 session, and presented to the Joint Transportation Committee and communicated the role of that new governance authority during that presentation. So now is the time for us to actually get a bill sponsor and to begin working on drafting that legislation. Unlike the process as I understand it in Washington State, you need to secure a bill sponsor before you can start working with legislative counsel on drafting bill language. Since this is the short legislative session coming up in 2022, each legislator is limited to 2 priority bills each, and each committee gets 3 bills that they can introduce. And so, once we have a sponsor, we can begin that work with legislative counsel, working to ensure that the Oregon legislation aligns with the Washington legislation that's being drafted. And with Oregon's timeline and finishing the legislative session at the end of June, legislators are really just now undertaking the work of deciding which 2 priority bills they want to run in 2022. A lot of legislative concepts get pitched to legislators during September legislative days coming up the week of September 20th, and they're not actually required to turn in their bill requests and make final decisions on their 2 priority bills until November 19th of this year. So, Representative Williams and Representative Thompson are both aware of where we are in the process and our need for a bill. They are both supportive of helping to move forward this bi-state bridge authority legislation, but they have also both been clear that they would prefer not to dedicate one of their 2 priority bills to the bridge authority legislation if we are able to make it a Joint Transportation Committee bill instead. So I am working to get a meeting with Representative McLean, who would be one of the 2 decision makers, along with Senator Beyer of Eugene, about whether this bi-state bridge authority legislation can be part of one of their committee bills or a standalone committee bill for 2022. And both Senator Thompson and Representative Williams are standing by to help us work with the co-chairs of the Joint Transportation Committee and make our case for making it a committee bill for the coming session. So a couple things, that we may run into, just to forecast those. Obviously, there may still be some concern that this governance model for the Hood River Bridge could set some sort of precedent that the I-5 bridge would have to follow concerning governance and ownership. Obviously, it's a very different situation. The ownership of the bridge is different. The scale of the project that we're talking about is very different. It is not owned by the state in the same way that the I-5 bridge is. And obviously, the proportion of regional and local traffic serving the Hood River Bridge is far higher. There's already tolling is already a cultural norm. So we'll just need to make sure that folks are comfortable with this being a separate entity that in no way sets a precedent that needs to be followed for the I-5 bridge. And then, you know, there's also been the question, which I understand has been raised, at least indirectly in Washington, about, you know, whether we really need new legislation to create this authority, or whether it can be done under current law. So, you know, that's something I know that Washington is working on that report, and that is just a question that we'll need to satisfactorily answer the Oregon legislators as well. So any question about the Oregon process or where we are in that process?
I would just add to Miles' really accurate review, very concise review, that we are updating our talking points that we've been using to distribute to the legislature to include some of the subtle changes in the Washington bill. So we're going to be seeing a presentation shortly. So we just want to make sure that what we're sharing with the Oregon legislators is the latest and greatest that's being worked on the Washington side. Any questions? Arthur, you're on mute still. There you go.
Sorry, I just hard to raise your hand and hit the mute switch at the same time. Miles, thanks a lot. I'm just, let me just ask this question in kind of a blunt way. If the bridge fell into the river tomorrow and a pile of money were found to replace the bridge, would we really be waiting for some sort of authorization from the two states? How hard would it be at that point to get state authorization to move forward? In other words, is this really a blocking item for us proceeding?
The establishment of the bridge authority?
Yes.
You know, I think it is going to be easiest to stand up this authority in both states if it is done concurrently. Obviously, you know, there's going to need to be a lot of coordination between Oregon and Washington to make sure that you know, no elements of either state's constitution are being violated, that the language is aligned in such a way so that it accurately makes the changes that are needed, and there will be different changes needed in Oregon and Washington statutes to move the bill. But you know, can the project continue if this bi-state bridge authority were to not pass in Oregon in 2022? Is that your question?
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to understand. It just seems so clear that if there's money and there's a will, there's no one against the local folks getting a bridge built. So what would be holding us back?
That's right, and certainly, I mean, it's not absolutely essential that the legislation passes in Oregon in 2022, but I think it's an important step in making sure that the right entity is receiving the funding that you're talking about, and that, you know, as I understand it, and happy to have Michael or Kevin jump in here, you know, that will become an important element of the project, is ensuring that the right entity is you know, starting to oversee that project and handle the funding that will continue to flow in.
I see you, Mike Fox. Let me just make a quick comment before turning it to you. I think part of the reason for starting it up was the fact that we anticipated that there would be significant funding coming from Olympia, and that there were the old generational concerns about the Port of Hood River and its current ownership, and that there would be a path forward for the Klickitat County community. And the MOU that was agreed to almost 2 years ago really props up that as a goal for the project. Mike, did you have a comment that you wanted to make, or a question? You're on mute.
Technology. I just wanted to ask a question, Miles. if we could find enough money to get the design effort going, and we write a contract such that we can do this in phases, and as money comes available, we keep going with it. Does not having this authority in place preclude us in awarding an engineering contract?
I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that question, Commissioner Fox. I'm not sure, on the procurement side, how essential the Bi-State Bridge Authority will be to setting up that contract. Kevin, I don't know if you can speak to that.
I think that that's something an attorney would need to analyze. I mean, clearly, we've been talking that any RFP development, any contracts would have some type of assignment ability to, if it was legal. I mean, that's what we're trying to study, to find out if a contract was awarded to the Port of Hood River in this interim role. And then once the new bridge authority was propped up and able to operate, can that contract be transferred over to the new bridge authority? I mean, that seems like a general goal, but we do need a legal review on that.
Who would be our legal person to do that, Kevin?
I think they would probably, I would lean on Jerry's advice for that. I don't know if Jerry would likely not be the person to make that analysis, but he could refer somebody at Schwabe Williamson or another firm that he would recommend.
In my mind, again, with bi-state agreement, we ought to be asking that question sooner than later.
I'm kind of interested to hear from our friends in Klickitat County about this. Commissioner Anderson, either of the mayors, any thoughts on this discussion?
You may be on mute.
Okay, I think Marla's coming on.
Since we seem to be quiet, I'll jump in. I guess my initial reaction hearing the Oregon update is a bit of trepidation, sensing there doesn't seem to be an absolute buy-in on what we would like to get proposed in 2022, having a route that seems clear. And I wasn't saying anything just because I'm not certain that that impression is fully formed or accurate, but off the cuff, I guess I was hoping for a little bit more confidence that our representatives would be strongly championing this going forward. I think I'm just concerned that it's not going to rate when it needs to go through the joint commission there. So I guess it does make me concerned about how much we are banking on that step in terms of the bigger picture and how we keep moving if this step sort of detours us to a degree.
Mayor, I can address that a little bit. I did not intend to imply that running this bill as a committee bill through the Joint Transportation Committee is our only option, but simply that it's our best option for a couple reasons. One is because of the limited number of bills that legislators can introduce and the requests that Senator Thompson and Representative Williams have made that we ensure that the Joint Transportation Committee is not an available avenue before either one of them commit to using one of their own priority bills on it. But also just because in a short session, you want to demonstrate broad support and you want to elevate legislation to the greatest degree possible to ensure that there's the energy needed to pass it in a 5-week session. And one of the best ways to do that is to introduce it as a committee bill rather than an individual legislator bill, because it shows, this isn't just a priority of the legislator from the district where this project is happening, this is a priority for, the transportation committee for this legislative session. So that is why we are pursuing that avenue first. And the other reason is just that regardless of whether this bill is a committee bill or a priority bill of the Hood River legislative delegation, at the end of the day, it's important that we have the support or at least the approval of the Joint Transportation Committee to move forward with this concept, because it's likely that the bill would move through their committee. And if Senator Beyer or Representative McLean are, for whatever reason, have lingering concerns about a bridge authority legislation because of the I-5 bridge, it's going to make it a challenge to move the legislation regardless of whether or not it's a committee bill. So that's why we're pursuing this avenue, not necessarily that it's the only option that we have available to us to run a 2020 bill for the bridge authority.
Thanks. That makes a little bit more sense. But I think it is just that fear that within Oregon, it seems that the I-5 bridge is just going to be a very cumbersome topic for us to navigate past or around, just so far by how they've been responding to what we're trying to do this year.
Arthur, let's see. Yeah, Arthur, go ahead.
Yeah,
Then you, Kate.
A question for Mayor Kiefler, because I'm trying to understand her comment a little bit. So the concept of a bi-state authority, we don't know specifically what it's going to look like, but we do know that there's a commitment by both sides that in this bridge, Washington and Oregon will be equal as opposed to in the existing bridge. And I'm wondering, is the problem that you're seeing the need for the finality of the legal description of this authority, or is it that you feel that politically your legislature or maybe your constituents are needing a better statement of Washington being an equal partner in this new bridge?
Well, I think underlying all of it is absolutely that last point you brought up. I think there's a lot of value on the line for Washington residents to feel like however this new bridge moves forward, there's strong representation and a voice given to the interests of those communities when it comes to this bridge. To your first point, no, I'm not concerned or have strong hesitation that the way that it seems to be working through on the Oregon side is a deal breaker. I think it's just back to that 30,000 foot view and knowing we're trying to get a lot of things moving at the same time. Are we being flexible enough if it seems that through on the Oregon side, the consideration or exploration that is needed further on that authority is a different type of timeline than what we've been anticipating? Are we just staged up correctly to keep these other lanes moving? Whether it's the funding conversations, representation through this group of a lockstep commitment by both Oregon and Washington representatives, be having the conversations that are needed and ensure, trust with these different entities that we see this moving forward in a way that keeps Washington and Oregon joined. And so with that, I don't want it to come across as though I just had a bad takeaway from Miles' initial presentation, but I think just to be honest, my internal reaction was kind of like, oh, I was hoping maybe it would be a bit stronger at this point. But I realize also that that doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't, when it comes forward, still get that broad statewide support it needs. I just think it's a reminder that we've got a couple obstacles, whether it's, I-5 bridge, the history of getting, state buy-in on this bridge for life to this point. So I think it's just more all of those things coming to the surface.
Thanks.
Mayor McBride, you had your hand up.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to kind of, after listening to Marla and Arthur, I just think that, some of these things we're trying to do, with the legislatures at this point, with the bi-state commission that we're trying to form. You know, that's just one aspect. Then we've got, you know, the money aspect. Then we've got the design aspect. I think that almost every single thing we're doing, we need to have a plan A and a plan B, and maybe even a plan C. And we keep moving forward with plan A, and we hope that will work. And if it doesn't, we have to have a plan B that after so many months, you know, oh man, that's kind of going sideways, or it's not quite as much money as we wanted. We're going to have to bring this in too. So I think that I'm not looking at all of these things as absolutes. As long as we can keep moving forward and we can keep having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C to keep things moving forward in all of these respects, whether it's engineering, design, money, legislative. To me, that is, you know, kind of our job as part of this group, is to keep moving. Don't let us get stuck on one thing and then kind of, oh, that's not going to work. And then we just kind of get stuck and don't move to the next step in all the different aspects. So after I'm hearing both of you talk, that's kind of my takeaway. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I chime in on that for a
Oh,
second?
yeah. Go ahead, Commissioner Chapman.
Sorry, Marla, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my takeaway from what you're saying is that it sounds to me like the Washington side feels that you guys are very, very eager for this project, and you kind of have all of your legislators and everyone focused on moving the project forward. And is it correct to assume that, like, for example, this last round of funding that was dispersed throughout the state of Oregon and given to each of these different legislators to spend on different projects, was it concerning that some of the monies that, for example, Representative Williams had, she chose to dedicate those to different projects instead of participating more in the bridge? Is that an example of some of the disconfidence that you have?
Well, first, let me just say, I hope that the only takeaway that's really coming from however my comments are being received is in line with a little bit what Mayor McBride said, which is just at the end of the day, continuing to be nimble and adapt when any of these things throw us a curveball. Because back to it, you were just asking, I think bottom line is, it is imperative for, I would say, all of our communities, but absolutely White Salmon and Bingen, that a new bridge happens. And so, sure, in my mind, from our elected officials, top down across in the state that are representing Klickitat County, and especially these two communities, when push comes to shove between different projects, for so many reasons, I would elevate this to the top of our list. And so if we need to have stronger conversations as this coalition with some of the representatives from both Oregon and Washington, or if there are other ways to make sure that we stay top of mind with them and not just a white paper that's getting lost in the shuffle, that's where I'm coming from. I think that there is such a strong argument to be made for how this bridge ties into all aspects of the long-term resiliency for our communities. It's not just an infrastructure project to me in terms of how White Salmon and Bingen continue to exist long-term. So that's where I'm coming from, is selfishly maybe just at the end of the day and beginning of the day, when I've had to choose between things on the White Salmon plate with some of our Washington officials, I'm always going to go with the bridge right now, because nothing else matters if this bridge falls in the water or we don't have it. I can do as much as I want to revitalize the downtown, but if people can only get here from Cascade Locks to the Dalles Bridge, it's a totally different dynamic.
Thank you for that. Other comments?
Yes, thanks, Kevin.
Yes.
This is Jake Anderson, Commissioner in Klickitat County. I don't have any issues with Oregon wanting to take it through the committee. If we look at our agreement, we're expecting it to take 2 years anyways. My first thought is likely one state will go before the other and get it through. And then once it's a pass on one side, then the other one will follow suit. If you're trying to get them both through at the same time, there's just a lot more opportunities for dysfunction. in the whole process. But in the end, I'm not worried about it. It's going to make it through. The only thing I worry about is ever getting brought into the I-5 debacle.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments? All right, well, our agenda's kind of blown out of the timelines that I had established, but very good discussion. It's really good to have the Klickitat County input on these discussions. Miles, thank you for giving us the update on the Oregon side. And with that, we're gonna transition back to some degree over to a very brief update on the legislation. Steve Siegel has been working very closely with the Washington Joint Transportation Committee. Members of the committee are here today. Maybe before I start the presentation, I would like to just introduce Paul Neal. Paul has been through a few Zoom meetings from what I can tell. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself and your team that are in attendance?
Sure. My name's Paul Neal. I'm with the Joint Transportation Committee. Our committee basically does studies during the interim as designated by the transportation budget in Washington. And one of those this year is this providing support for the Hood River Bridge project. It's a little bit of an unusual project for us because it's not really a study. It's more like they directed us to hire an attorney to help figure out what's the best way to skin this cat. And that person is Stacy Lewis. So I will hand it over to her to introduce herself and kind of describe what she's been up to.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, Stacy Lewis. I'm a partner at Pacifica Law Group. I'm a public finance attorney, serve as bond counsel to state agencies and municipalities in Washington and Oregon, and tasked by the Joint Transportation Committee to look at the Interlocal Cooperation Act and produce a report that identifies alternative or additional statutory authority under Washington law to enable the local governments to form a bi-state entity that would have the authority to impose tolls, to issue bonds, to accept federal and state grants. And we've prepared a draft report that essentially reviews the Washington authority under existing law, identifies additional authority that would be required or would be helpful to have clarified, and have that draft report underway. Also had a number of conversations with Steve Siegel and have reviewed the now 2 drafts of legislation he sent our way to confirm that the draft legislation that he is working on, that there's a meeting of the minds in terms of what we've identified in our draft report as well. So that's been our role.
Thank you, Stacy. And Stacy's going to make sure I don't go off the tracks during the presentation with Steve not being in attendance. So Paul, do we have Kim, Martin, or Mark? I think we've at least got Kim.
Yeah, I can say Kim Johnson and Mark Madison are both here if you folks would like to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Kim Johnson. I'm nonpartisan staff counsel to the Senate Transportation Committee.
My name is Mark Madison. I'm the staff coordinator for the House Transportation Committee. I'm nonpartisan staff, and I'm standing in for David Monarchy, who is on vacation. He would normally be here, and he's an attorney on our staff.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. With that, I'm going to jump into this presentation. Everybody has, with the working group, has seen this. Are you seeing the cover slide? Okay. So I'm not going to read this presentation since you've had it for some time, but I just want to summarize some of the main changes since the first draft. The underlying theme to all of this is the memo of understanding that the 6 local governments agreed to almost 2 years ago. That's really the driving document as far as making sure that both states here locally have some say in the development of the governance. And certainly appreciate all the input from your local government councils that submitted comments and were part of reviewing these drafts. As noted, a lot of the technical fixes, most of these issues have been legal issues. And we're going to talk a little bit about what some of these larger changes have been, but at the end of the day, that it's the same powers and duties as in the first draft. So the new addition is the use of formation agreements, commission formation agreements. And a lot of this has to do with whether the legislation is general in nature or specific in nature. And I think we initially were looking at legislation that would be specific to the Hood River Bridge, but it made more sense after review that there was more general language that would allow any similar type of bridge in Washington and Oregon, or Washington and Idaho, I guess, to be created by the local governments using commission formation agreements. I wouldn't quite say that they were IGAs, but basically a tool that would form the commission through acts of the local governments. In the case of this new draft, there's only 2 local governments that own a bridge that goes into another state, and that would be the Port of Hood River and the Port of Cascade Locks. So as the legislation currently reads, it limits it to local government-owned interstate toll bridges, and so there's only 2 at this time, and so it wouldn't include the DOTs or other non-local government-owned bridges. And the other item that was added was there was some question about the which underlying laws would supersede the commission. For instance, public meeting rules, public contracting rules, public records. And this draft states that wherever the home office is located would be those laws. Wherever the home office would be located, we'd follow that state's underlying laws and rules.
Kevin,
Yes.
this is Kate.
Yeah.
So looking at that slide and what you just said, the way this is being written at this point would exclude an I-5 bridge, correct?
Is that right, Stacy? As I understand it, the state DOTs would not have access to this.
Correct. The entities authorized to form a commission are ports, cities, and counties, and to form for the purpose of financing improvements to a bridge owned by one of those local entities. So that's the sort of the pool of folks who could take action under the draft legislation.
So that would be favorable to the Portland area people that are having consternation about this affecting the I-5 bridge, because this specifically says it doesn't. Correct? Okay, thanks.
So continuing on, thank you for jumping in. If you have a question, please jump in. Continuing on, so the initial round of legislation included a lot of the detail as far as how that commission would be formed. The new draft would actually defer the details of what the new commission would look like to those formation agreements. So that would make the bill, in theory, a little bit leaner and put more of the work and the details to the new authority in the formation agreements. And there's just a summary of the types of agreements that were noted in the MOU and had previously been discussed. So there were some other changes, some smaller ones, some other bigger ones. So the new change is a legal one, but the differences between municipal corporations and public corporations. And the new version would not require the need for a territorial boundary. There was some concern with the first version that a boundary would need to be identified. This the second version does not need that. There was a clarification on ensuring that there'd be tax exemption for bonds and tolls to this new entity. There was language added for the dissolution of the new commission if for some reason that was needed, and also includes the acknowledgement that the bridge would need to be removed, and specifically calls out how an existing bridge would need to be removed or disposed of. And again, just reiterates the emphasis on the independent character of the commission, separating itself from the local governments and the state. So here, I guess we kind of jump this slide to the beginning. As Paul noted, this was pressed by the Senate Transportation Committee through Senator King's work. And I'm not sure, Paul, your work on this finishes up by the end of the year, or what's?
Our deadline in statute is September 22nd, I believe. Or is it late September? It might be the 30th, but yeah, we have a very tight timeline on this. So yeah, we're sort of part of it again. We're not really doing a report, which we would normally do. We're just sort of providing assistance, and by we, I mean Stacy.
Yeah, and with Steve Siegel's help. So just kind of jumping into the next steps, there are some minor legal issues that need to be completed. So there will be a draft 3, and that is anticipated to be released later this month. There will be an opportunity for all of the local government councils to get an opportunity to make comment, legal councils, just to clarify. And that the bi-state working group would, we would hope to bring this back to the bi-state working group for approval in mid-September. And then we would also be looking for the individual local government boards to provide supporting resolutions for the legislation. So we are shooting to have this back to the legislature beginning of next year, and once that went through the process in Washington State, that would be completed by July of 22. And I would at this point be happy to defer to Stacy to see to what degree I stayed on the tracks, and if you had any other thoughts about the summary from the draft 2 legislation.
That was a good summary. I don't have anything to add.
Are there any questions from the working group on what you've heard or read? Arthur.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to make sure I'm seeing this right. What I see are some interesting technical questions, but I'm not seeing a lot in the way of policy questions that would raise the hackles or would attract the attention of legislators. So I'm wondering, we have these legislative experts in the online now. I'm wondering if I'm missing something. Do you see this as pretty much technical now, or are there policy questions?
Paul, is that something you could maybe address from your?
From what I've seen, I think this is basically, we're at the point where what we were brought in to do is helpful, because I think, and I know Brad's not here to comment on this, but my understanding of why Brad asked for this in the transportation budget was to make sure that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, so that when this bill came to the legislature, that we wouldn't have these kind of questions. Whereas absent, I think it was Stacy who brought up the point that we need to have general legislation, not special, under the Washington State Constitution. That would be, while an arcane requirement, it is a constitutional requirement. It's the kind of thing that would high center a bill in the middle of session if something came up at that point. So these are, I think, are exactly the kind of questions that this review is designed to tease out and make sure so that when the bill goes in front of the legislature, people like Mark and Kim will be able to say, yeah, we've talked about this and this is why it's this way and not that way.
Thanks. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
All right, any other comments? All right, well, Paul, thank you very much. Stacy, thank you for your time and effort on this project. I know Steve has enjoyed working with you on it. And Kim and Mark, thank you for sitting in with us as well. And we'll be talking shortly. Thank you. Let's see, moving on to the next, if Mike Fox has he has a presentation on the revitalization of the working group. I'd like to, Mike, if you're prepared, I'd like to move that up ahead of my NEPA presentation. So Mike, if you want to share your screen and talk a little bit about your proposal. I think that this is not terribly different than what Port staff has been looking at, but I think that Commissioner Fox's interpretation is very helpful. So Mike, if you're on mute right now. Yeah, if you can just unmute yourself.
How's that?
There you go. I can hear you.
All right. And let me do this. And you can all see this?
Not the presentation.
And hold on.
We saw it for a minute, but then we lost it.
Yeah, I know.
As soon as you unmuted yourself, it disappeared.
Okay, I think we're back, huh?
There we go.
Okay, so over the last couple of weeks, I've been around meeting with all of the individual members of the Bi-State Working Group. And I came away with this idea of re-energizing our effort. I started with the MOU that is in place, and I think it's a great document. And I tried to come up with some ideas, maybe re-energizing the organization. Firstly, we all know what's going on with the current bridge. It's definitely too narrow. The bridge is degrading. You've heard issues with our lifting cables, the approaches on both ends, load study being undertaken to evaluate what's going on load-wise on our bridge. Over time, it's likely we're going to have additional weight restrictions and probably speed enforcement, especially for heavy trucks. Heavy trucks at speed tend to beat up the bridge. So as I was talking to everybody, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be neat if? So we came up with this idea that in 4 years' time, the end of 2025, not the fiscal year, the calendar year, if we have all the funding that we're going to get from the states and the federal, we have a replacement management contract in place, and it's highly functional. We've awarded in a design contract, and the design has been completed in 4 years. A construction contract's been awarded. Construction's mobilized. It's in the water. The foundation work is well underway. And we've got a decommissioning plan approved for the current bridge. And this is aspirational, but wouldn't it be neat if we could in fact be here in 4 years? Now, all the while, there's a plan B sitting out there What happens if we don't have all the funding? What's a plan B? And I think we have to talk about that in the near future of, maybe what is that plan B? And when do we think we need to pull the trigger on really making it real? The role of the bi-state working group, when I look at it and I look at the MOU, we're a very strong advocate of the replacement. We understand the criticality of replacing the current bridge. And I think the bi-state working group needs to stay in tune with what's happening on the current bridge. As we find new things on the bridge that are degrading faster than what we thought, I think the port needs to keep the bi-state working group current with what's going on the bridge. That helps, I think, all of us in the sense of urgency that we've got getting a new bridge in place. My opinion, the bi-state working group thoughts and opinions are super important. And I don't see us as a check the box organization. Thanks very much, but never mind. I think without having this other entity in place, we're it. We are the local communities. We are the representatives to manage the going forward on this new bridge. Now, the execution of it may be contractually through the port, but as far as the strategies, the decisions and so on, I think our bi-state working group should have, and I believe does have, an awful lot of power. So I think we got to think about a multifaceted approach here. We got to understand what the current bridge or what the new bridge is going to cost. And let me stop there for a minute. Some of you were on a Zoom meeting with me with WSP on the last day or two, where the intent was to go through and understand the current estimate on the bridge. Frankly, it was a little bit of a disappointing discussion for me. Here's my takeaway from it. The basic raw quantities were derived back in 2008. There was an initial cost study done, real gross cost study done in 2011. In 2018, there was an update study done that took the same quantities back at 2008. And it was not a complete estimate. And there was some glaring errors that but nobody ever really checked or resolved. And then in 2018, there was an update of that study, which basically was adding a little bit more contingency and about 3 or 4 items gross items that were missed in the original estimate. So bottom line between us, we don't have an estimate, I believe, that we can stand up and say, yep, I believe in this. This is a decent estimate that we can really justify how much money we really need. So I challenged WSP through Kevin, and I believe Michael was on the phone, to give us an estimate of what it would take to update this whole bridge estimate in about 3 phases. Phase 1 would be, let's agree on the scope and the execution strategy. Phase 2 and 3 are work together where they build a schedule and the cost estimate that relates to the schedule. That's giving us a first time real good look at what we think it's going to cost. I've asked that I kind of targeted that I wanted this estimate to be ready for us in 3 months at the maximum. And they were to come back and give the port an estimated cost. I've got something in the back of my mind what I expect it to cost, but we'll see what they come up with. By the way, the company did initially say, well, we need to do more design before we can really do this. And I said, no, you don't. It says we need a baseline now that we can manage from. And then as design progresses in about 2 steps, we'll update this estimate and we'll update it. And then we'll start tracking our progress against it. Right now, we don't have a baseline. So that's underway. I think we got to review and discuss and agree on the role of a replacement bridge management contract. We need, all of us, we need some qualified arms and legs to go do the work that we want them to go do. And right now, we don't have that. So I think we've got to get this thing in place, and there's some more discussion on it here in a minute. Agree to spend part of our existing funding to stand up this management contract. Discuss and reach agreement on a path forward for design construction approach, like contracting strategy. Are we going to do a design and a build? Are we going to do a design build? Are we going to do some combination of it? Or do we have, you know, as a plan B, we got something else waiting out there for us? We need to strengthen the communication plan in support of funding. I was really excited after I met with Marla and understood her background. I think she could really help us in this particular area, just really up our game. And what we mean here is we need a comprehensive storyline with some really good materials that all of us can use as we're going out and talking to our constituents, talking to the legislative branches and so on. We just take it off the shelf and run with it, kind of a thing. But more than that, I think we need a comprehensive communication plan that's all encompassing. So we've sat and thought about this, and now we go attack it on 2 or 3 or 4 fronts. We discuss and reach agreement on the path forward regarding early geotechnical work. You know, some people say, let's get in the water right now. There's risk associated with this, and I think we got to talk about it. And the big risk that I see is if we go ahead and do this work, and then we give it to an engineering contractor, a couple of different things could happen. They could say, well, thank you very much, but if you're directing us to use this, we will. If it's wrong, not our problem. Or they're going to say, if it's a lump sum contract of some type, no, we're not going to use it. We want to redo it ourselves. So there's some things that we got to talk about within the committee before we really decide how you want to proceed with this. So the role of I'm sorry, I got to move my screens here. The role of the management contract, draft and review with the bi-state working group, all contracting packages and modify them as we deem fit. So there are arms and legs. They've got qualified people that have done this before in this type of business. So they can really help us make sure that when we get something out there, it's quality and it's not going to come back and hurt us later on. Strengthen and develop the community outreach program, manage for the port and the bi-state working group, the actual contractor performance against the contract. So if we award an engineering contract from this group, they're going to be responsible for managing that contract for us. We certainly have insight into what's going on, but they're our go in between type organization. Evaluate and process contract change orders with proper authorization. Develop, maintain replacement project budget schedules, risk logs, cash forecasts. It's the normal things that you got to do in a major project such as this. Support our information needs from both the bi-state working group and the port and others as we need it. Ensure the project's proceeding to plan and we're under financial control, and then meet with us as often as we want them to meet with us. And I think it's probably twice a month. Could be more depending on the issue. So what does this contract look like? I think it's made up of a number of different people. We don't need to have them all on board 100% of the time forever. Some will come on now, some will come on later, some will leave earlier. But I think to start out with, we need a qualified project manager that is experienced in this type of work, heavy construction and design of bridges. We need an engineering technical person now that can help us draft the RFQ and RFP for design. We know what we're looking for and how to manage them. We need a contract specialist that's really good at writing very tight contracts. That person will more than pay for themselves if we write the contracts well and we limit the number of exposures that we have. Scheduling, communications, estimating now for various obvious reasons, and some we've talked about. I think construction and safety later. There's one item that I think we probably add now, and that's regulatory interface. Even though hopefully we will have the NEPA process done and the record of decision, we're not done with other various entities that can influence what our bridge looks like. So we need some help in working our way through that. I think we need some staff support. My guess is one now, possibly a second one later on for the staff. I showed here performance-based incentives on design and construction performance. This is something that we should be talking about, not only for those two contracts, but perhaps maybe even on the RBMC. We want to create an environment here where this team of people are working really hard for us, and they're doing the right things for us, and they're doing exactly what we want them to do. And if they do that, then maybe we need to think about how do you reward them for that? Just an idea. So what would this stuff cost? So I did an estimate based on staffing and so on, and some costs for utilities, rent, and whatnot. And this is on a fiscal year basis. So you can see the spreads here, $1 million, $1.3 million, $1.5 million, and so on down through the years. And there's some escalation factors in here as well. What this does not include is if we put any kind of performance incentive on the contractor. And that performance incentive is not only making money, but losing money. So we ought to be thinking about a risk reward penalty type set of incentives. And that's done all the time in the industry. So next step, we adjust this however we want to do it. And I'd really like to see if we can't get concurrence that we think this is a good idea moving forward. We get the Port Commission to endorse it, and then start developing an RFQ package for the management contract, where we really state out the scope of work, define the job descriptions, evaluation and scoring approach, define targets, target bidders, and so on. And I'm thinking, just to start out with, maybe this is a 4-year contract with 3 one-year extensions options. And I'd kind of like to see that we award this thing and mobilize by November 1 or maybe December 1st, but we're talking a few months. We're not talking a year away.
Actually, Mike, if you could just go back, I just wanted to clarify one thing. Where you mentioned the owner's rep RFQ package. Chuck Green actually had worked on the engineering RFP, and it was a WSP that had done the owner's rep RFQ. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that was an error. But the WSP package for this particular RFQ, it needed major work. You would not issue it the way it is. But thanks for that. Okay, so I think we need to locate some and lease some office space. I I'll throw out an option. I think we ought to put it either in White Salmon or over in Bingen. It would show the Washington side that, yeah, you have an equal part in making this project a success. And it's not just Oregon, it's both of us together. Supporting draft language into the infrastructure bill describing what's needed and continue to work with the states to attract the funding that we needed. So this is kind of a thought that we've been playing around with, and I think it really ties in with the MOU that already exists, but it maybe puts a little bit more meat on the bone of what do we do next? And I sure welcome, comments and at the end of comments, I'd like to see if we can get concurrence to move this forward. So I'm open.
Any comments on what the working group has seen here? And you've probably seen a version of this earlier as well.
I'll go first. I like it in general. I mean, meat on the bone, that is a pretty good way to put it, I guess, Mike. It feels like it's concrete steps for, what are we doing next? I mean, we talk about doing the bi-state work that we're doing and trying to get the monies from the state and the feds, okay, all those things. But this is like concrete, getting people here on the ground. How is this going to work? It feels like it's real, like this is going to happen. We have dates we're going to work towards. We're going to have people we're going to hire to, start doing RFQs. It just makes it feel so much more real to me to have this kind of a plan. And I know it costs money, but it just, and to have somebody that's done it before, someone that's built a bridge, it just feels a lot more real to me.
Arthur.
So I have a question for Mike. Mike, who do these folks report to and who sets their priorities?
I think we've got to decide that by the working group. It's going to be up to the working group to make that recommendation. If I was called on to give my opinion right now today, I would say this organization has to currently work for Michael, the port administrator executive. Later on, when this other entity is put in place, then I think it moves over. We novate this contract over to the new organization. But I think legally and contractually, I think there's a mechanism, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, that the port could do this today. But I think strong input of what these people do is coming from the bi-state working group. So I see the bi-state working group making the call. It goes in front of the port, which if we have a strong support from the bi-state, the port commissioners should go right along with it. And then direction is given to Michael to get on with it. That's the way I kind of see this thing going.
Any comments from the Klickitat County side? I see Gordon Kelsey, who's the Public Works Director from Klickitat County, is still on the line. Gordon, any thoughts on how this is set up from your experiences on smaller projects? Oh, there we go. Commissioner Anderson. I don't think we're hearing you, Jake.
Sorry, I double mute.
There you go.
I'd like to hear from Michael on his thoughts on this, since these people would be reporting directly to him.
Well, I'd say, I think this is pretty much in line with the path we've been on. We've called it an owner's rep. This is a different, somewhat different, but also more extensive description of what the task would be. So I think this makes sense. As Commissioner Fox pointed out, this would need to be a contract in a direction that is affirmed by the bi-state working group. And if they do, then the commission would undoubtedly accept that going forward. The concerns I have, and they're only mostly in terms of the practical side, is that I think we have to be realistic about the sequence of steps that need to take place in order to engage a contractor like this. And I also think that we need to be cognizant of the money side, meaning we have to make sure that we have the funding, or that the funding is tied to the commitments we made and the scopes of work that are in the build grant and the Washington and Oregon grants. So we're not moving too far in a different direction that we told the legislators that we would do. I think there's also just a fundamental question that this contractor could help us all with. We've talked a lot about a public-private partnership. We've talked about different delivery mechanisms, design, bid, build, et cetera. And I think ultimately that question will take a while to develop an answer to, meaning what exactly is the delivery mechanism that works. And then finally, just underlying what Commissioner Fox said, to reiterate that the current strategy and the Port Commission's commitment and desire is to ultimately transfer this project to another entity, so that whatever steps are taken and whatever contracts are in place need to be positioned so that they can be transferred, and that responsibility transferred to likely or potentially the bi-state authority. So I think it's a good direction. It can accelerate some things that we anticipated, but had anticipated a bit later. But I do have some practical concerns about how to get through this.
Following on Michael's point, I think I'm a bit concerned that if we set it up this way, we might be creating the optics that we're working on another Porterfoot River controlled bridge. And I know that we're all committed that that's not what we're doing, but it may start to look to the public like that is the case. So I'm wondering if the Washington State folks, are you worried about that? If you're not worried about it, I'm not worried about it, but do you see the same problem that I'm imagining?
I guess for me, Mike, you're thinking that these are going to be contractors that are going to be full-time, that are going to be staffed around here, but they're going to be contract employees. They're not going to be port staff. And so the big question then would be is they would be directly overseen by Michael, but the direction and decision-making would be overseen by the Bridge Working Group. And if that's the case, then I'm not too worried about, what the public's going to say.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought we would do. And then I think it would also help if we put the office where these people are located away from the port and over on the Washington side. I think it would also help in that dialogue.
So the other thing that I wonder is are these going to be full-time employees, or are these highly technical people that may be working on 3 different projects that may be in 5 different states who are the best of what they do? For me, I don't have to have somebody here all the time. I'd rather have the people who have the right knowledge, expertise, and they've probably worked together. It's probably a group of professionals. We see those popping up all over the place, these ad hoc organizations in essence. If we can save the money by not having them here, that good luck finding a place to stay if you did bring them here.
I would recommend that we put that as an option on the proposals. And the option is either I personally think there's at least 3 of them ought to be here pretty much full time for a bit. And then it could drop down to 1, but then it goes back up. As we get into real construction, I think you need them on site. But if we could get, again, we got to see what the market's going to do for us. If we get people that are qualified people that are in Portland or Vancouver or someplace relatively close, then I think we could certainly make this an office back there someplace instead of, you don't absolutely have to have it here. I think it is important to have some of them here, but I think the neat thing is we don't have to solve that one today. We can make it an option on the RFQ and then listen to them.
And Jake, I would just add that, I've been involved in projects as the executive director of a smaller organization where there just was no capacity for any technical aspect of the job. And so when the agency hired the owner's rep, that owner's rep did live in the community primarily during the construction period, became a part of the community and was there every morning for the tailgate meetings and other important roles to represent the port. It was the Port of Garibaldi on the Oregon coast. And so he just became a part of the community. Every meeting he would come in and give the technical updates to the commission, and was representing the local concerns when it came to dealing with the engineers and or the contractor. And he did live they did rent a house for the guy. He was an engineer in his early 30s, and he lived in the next community over. Obviously things that's a different area and a different era, but certainly used to seeing that type of setup.
Jacob, I see this thing is going to evolve around a little bit. So give you another scenario here. We bring the teams together, we get the RFQ for design ready to go. You got to have input from contracts, from engineering, from scheduling, from estimating, all these other people. Once that contract is awarded, it may make sense to move the engineer to wherever the design is being done. So they have daily oversight of progress and so on. And we've done that many, many times on lots of different projects. You want to try, if everything else is equal, you want to try and get them as close to where the work is as possible. But again, the neat thing is we don't have to solve that one today.
Michael, did you have a comment?
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add is that I think it's important to develop a finance plan now or soon based on the financing that we know we have in place or we know is coming. So with the 3 times $5 million plus the port's contribution of $1.2 million or so, we have, at least at this time, a known universe of funding. I think it would be important for staff to develop, at least start with a general and then move to more specific detailed version of how we're going to spend the money. Because there's other tasks that we have committed to making, both Oregon and Washington, and through the build grant, such as the traffic and revenue modeling. We have the administrative costs of this and other things, so that the bi-state working group has an idea of how much reasonably can be spent, should be spent on this task, how much is available for other tasks, and then how much is left for engineering, because the engineering has been a high priority, and the geotechnical work, to move the confidence level, move the design up, and therefore derive a better confidence level for the cost estimate. So what Commissioner Fox has done is laid out some estimates of how much this would cost. I'd like to know more about what's behind those numbers, what the assumptions are, and then how to nest that in with the other tasks that we have to do with the funding we have available. With good luck and good fortune and tailwinds, we can achieve some additional funding and move forward. But at this point, we know what we have to work with.
And I do have a draft finance plan for this post-NEPA pre-construction phase that I can certainly bring some ideas to the working group to review. You know, honestly, I think that with all of the bureaucracy that's going on with the build grant, that one focused primarily on engineering. And if there's a slight delay on getting the build funds released, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we've said in the state funding that owner's representation was important. And so we could use that those state funds, which may be available before the build, to focus on some of these upfront planning efforts, and then bring in the build when the AE design contract's ready to release. So I hear you. One of the things that, are there any other comments before we try to get consensus, Arthur?
Yeah, there's another subject that I'd like to discuss in this. I was letting that one play out. But this concerns slide number 2, which is the 2025, I'll call it Mike's dream slide of the things that we'd like to see done by 2025. That is slide number 2, correct?
Yes.
So I think that as we reinvigorate this process, we need to have a stronger public statement, or stronger statement amongst each other of the fact that this is the whole time is of the essence concept, that there is a cost to delaying the project in 2 manners. One is the cost of the money we keep pouring into this bridge, which is going to be torn down. And the second is the ever escalating construction prices. So you've stated 2025, and the way you just described it is sort of like, gee, it would be nice if we had all of these things worked out by 2025. I think when we've talked about it in the past, it's more been, if we don't have this worked out by 2025, we're in serious trouble. And I tend to be in the latter camp. And playing off Mayor McBride's comment before about always having a plan B, I just want to be clear. I know that we're trying to be cautious about saying that if we don't get public funding, that we'll be looking at private funding options. But I want to at least in some manner know that all of us agree that having some bridge is more important than having a 100% publicly funded bridge, and that we all have similar deadlines in mind as to when we think the scale tips from one side to the other, that that we simply can't wait any longer. So I'm not sure if people are going to be comfortable discussing that now, or if this could be a subject for discussion at a later meeting. But I really would like to have some better feel for how you all feel about how quickly is the clock ticking in your minds, and how should we be working on a plan B? How publicly or privately should we be working on a plan B as this goes on?
Hey, just a comment on that before further discussion. The back of my mind, this replacement bridge management contract, one of their exercises is to get a design contract RFQ defined and in place. Right after that, or on hot standby, if you will, would be options for like a PPP. We don't want to circumvent this first one. We want to put all of our effort on that. But I think it's wise that we have this other one sitting on hot standby or simmer in case we have to pull the trigger and do that. Now, the date that you pull that trigger, I think I would recommend that we have one of our meetings to talk about that, because I think there's lots of different inputs to that. When is that date, and why did you pick that date? And I've got some thoughts on that too. And I'm sure everybody does. But what I'd really like, if we could, if you guys feel comfortable enough with this approach, could we take a vote on it and see if you support what this thing says?
I would say right now the MOU has this as a consensus-based organization, so I would recommend not taking an explicit vote, but try to come to some consensus. Marla, mute.
Hi, sorry, you'd think a year and a half into Zoom world, I would not be forgetting the mute button. But I had one question just to go back to a point that Michael made earlier and to understand if we do kind of come out of this with a consensus going forward, what is the next step then? Is the next step saying, yes, we would like the port to come back to us, having run the numbers and showing us the financial outlook of known funds and how this proposed path forward would affect some of that, or where there might be a gap? And then the bi-state working group is using that information to determine confidence level on being able to fund some of the costs associated with this direction. Is that kind of what we're trying to come out of today with? Or are we trying to come out of today saying, yes, we like what's being proposed, go forward?
In my mind, I think what I'm asking for is, do you agree with the overall approach that we talked about in this presentation package about re-energizing the bi-state working group by us getting more involved in the decision-making process, understanding where the current bridge is and how it's degrading, getting a lot more involved in the communication aspect of it, and going out and really seeking support for the funding from our constituents and others. And then getting this replacement bridge management contract in place to act as our arms and legs and technical support for doing everything else that we talked about in this re-energized bi-state working group. If you give me that endorsement, then I want to take it to the Port Commission tomorrow night and hopefully be able to say, this package has been reviewed with the bi-state working group. They agree with what it says. They're willing to, put their shoulder to the wall and help make it happen. They want us to stand up a bridge management contract, replacement bridge management contract, consisting of these types of things. Now, awarding of that contract, we got to go back. I think we got to go back to the bi-state commission. And I would say that you need to see the RFQ to make sure that it reflects what we really want that company to do or contract to do, and then go forward with it. Now, Michael is concerned about the funding for this first contract. I get it. We give him direction, basically go find the funds and let us know how the port's going to pay for this until this other agency is stood up. But we believe from the bi-state working group, this is important enough that it ought to take some priority over some of the other stuff that may be occurring. That's kind of what I'm hoping that we can get to today.
I think.
What do you feel that it needs to take priority over? Because right now, I mean, the last few meetings, priority has been, we're getting to the next phase, and that is engineering, and that is priority.
Well, here's the issue with engineering. If you don't have a management contract in place, who is really going to be watching out for us as you develop and evaluate the engineering bids and then actually manage the engineering contract? We don't really have staff on board to be able to do that today. So I think what we've got here is a little bit of out of sequence work. You really need to get your infrastructure built, your management contractor, and then go fast and get the rest of this in place and moving on. I think I think getting engineering in place before you get this in place is not a good thing.
Mayor Pickford?
Just real quick, because as you were giving that answer, a light bulb went off in my head. And are we somewhat considering then moving forward with a CMAR relationship for developing the bridge? Is that kind of similar in terms of what is being proposed, where we would have kind of that construction manager taking on that risk for the project owner?
Yes. Yeah. So, you know, as you get into design, you want somebody that's knowledgeable of construction to be able to do construction reviews of the design. I believe it's super critical that you get the contract written very well so you can control the costs of the design. Most design contracts of this size, you have a very strongly worded contract, really well thought out, because it's not going to take much that the cost of this thing is just going to take off. So you got to be really careful. And you're in the very formative stages of this whole thing. So I use the term in the past, and I kind of, some ways I hate it, some ways I like it. Go slow to go fast. I'm a firm believer we need to go fast. But at the same time, we got to make sure that we thought through this thing as we get the contracts geared up to go. We thought through the process properly. That's the little bit of go slow process, and getting this management contract in place before you do design, that's part of going slow. But once you do it, then it's giddy up and everybody, let's go. And I personally believe we've got a very good shot at making those milestones on page 2 or 3 or whatever it is. But we got to do this thing really smartly and carefully.
Okay, so in order to take this in front of the Port Commission, we need to have decided who's going to decide on who the management group is. Is that going to be Michael choosing that? Is it going to be part of the Port Commission? Is it going to be the Bridge Working Group reviewing those? And then the next one I would think of is in terms of that management RFP or RFQ for those positions, who's going to write that up? I didn't see that in your.
Good questions. The answer to the first one, in my opinion, and in the way I tried to write this document, is that the bi-state working group, at least members of that group, need to sit through the decision board on who gets awarded the or the bid evaluation, who gets awarded this management contract. And I believe the bi-state working group has to approve the selection of that person or that company. And then once we endorse it, then it goes to the port for final approval and direction to award the contract under the governance that exists today with the port. Who writes the RFQ, if you will? It's an interesting discussion. The port's got a couple of contract people right now. I think what we end up doing is tapping into them, but I've also offered, I'll help write the scope of work for this particular contract. And I've got go-bys, and Kevin was able to get go-bys from, who was that, Kevin?
That was the Multnomah County for the Burnside Bridge project.
And I'll tell you what, when Kevin showed me that RFQ, structurally and component-wise, it was very similar to what I was thinking. So I think that's a decent go-by. We need to really strengthen it of exactly what we want these people to do. And more importantly, the whole scoring and decision-making process of who is awarded to. In my opinion, these types of contracts, the quality of the team is paramount. So we would probably want to do some oral boards and have them not only the written presentation, but we'd want to see how they react under fire. So one option is to give them a challenge, and let's see how they address the challenge.
I don't know how many of you were around, but it would be very similar to the process for selecting the NEPA contract. So there was a board made up of DOT planners, engineers, Port of Klickitat, Port of Hood River, et cetera. They reviewed all the written materials, scored them based on the criteria. And then the top scores were invited for oral presentations. And then the scores were combined that produced the final recommendation to the executive director and the Port Commission. It would be similar that obviously the criteria would be different for this work, but the concept would be similar.
Can I weigh in at this point? Going back to, I believe, a question Mayor Kiefler had. This item is on the Port Commission agenda for tomorrow night. And Commissioner Fox has asked that to be considered. The presentation that you saw is in the packet. So the question is, what action is being requested of the Port Commission? And if that's being requested of the Port Commission, I think it's appropriate to ask the Bi-State Working Group if you endorse that the action. And it's really a two-parter. Now, this can be worded differently. Commissioner Fox may wish to word it differently. But the way that it's worded now under action items is, one, authorize development of procurement process for replacement bridge management contractor. Now that would lay out the scope, it would lay out the form and content of the request for qualifications, it would lay out a schedule, but it then would be brought back to the Bi-State Working Group for consideration and further endorsement. So if your endorsement today would be of that component piece, develop a process, develop an RFQ, bring it back to us. And then the second part, which is I think a bit more nuanced, is draft an update to the bridge replacement strategy document that the Bi-State Working Group has prepared and reviewed and endorsed prior, and likewise the Commission did. What's that saying is take the presentation, take the materials that Commissioner Fox has prepared, and direct staff to then modify the strategy document and come back again to the Bi-State Working Group for further discussion and endorsement. So I wanted
Well said. Well said.
So if you endorse this, and if you're comfortable with endorsing those two steps, they are not definitive. They're asking or endorsing the Commission, directing staff to develop these products and bring them back to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mayor.
I think these are, these are high level. There's a lot of detail in the future. I think what Commissioner Fox has put forth is high level. I mean, it's definitely a plan and it's definitely meaty, but every single little detail is not worked out. I think that this document is asking in general, do we want this concept that he has put in front of us to go forward with more meat on the bones, so to speak. And so I think that's what you're asking us to endorse, is just a more meaty, M-E-A-T, meaty process to continue forward. And we'll continue working with the port and with Michael McElwee helping us and looking at the numbers that we have and figuring out how we or the port are going to get more money to pay for it. I mean, all those are details, but I was just those are details. Staff and ourselves will help work those out as we go. So I don't know that we have to have every single answer to every little thing other than the general concept. And I endorse it. I'm good with it.
Thank you.
I endorse it as well.
Who was that?
That was Mayor Barnes.
Oh, thank you.
I just didn't want to see you guys see me fight my fly that's bugging me. So
Commissioner Anderson,
Commissioner Anderson supports it.
Mayor
Thank you.
Kiefler,
Same, I support it.
Commissioner Babbitts,
Well, I was thinking of asking for the vegetarian alternative, but no, I do in fact support this. I do think that I hope everyone realizes this will involve more meetings for us, playing a more active role. There's going to be some hard work associated with this. But from what I see, you've all been digging in so far, and hope we can all dig in more.
So that's a yes.
That's a yes.
sounds like it there, Commissioner
A
Fox.
little long-winded.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for that conversation. There's one item that I do want to bring back from the my report, the NEPA update, and that is the status of Steve Siegel's contract. And so Steve's has ample budget authority still remaining in his contract, but the actual term of the contract has ended. So what I am looking for is consensus to amend his contract from the end of June to the end of January, so that he can finish through on the work with the Joint Transportation Committee and the Oregon legislative staff if we get to that point. There are subsequent phases which will be brought back to the bi-state working group with budgets and so forth for you to review before authorizing. And I anticipate that probably wouldn't be more than a couple of months away. And that the Port Commission would look for your support of his work and those subsequent contracts. But I definitely want to, I am certainly recommending that his current work contract be extended through the end of January so he can complete this phase 2 work on the governance.
So I guess I always get worried when I see a contractor using up the time but not the money. So can you explain a little bit about how we got into that circumstance?
Yeah, I think it was more when it was when the contract was established last year. Frankly, it should have been that end date shouldn't have been at the end of the session of the session that just finished. It should have been previewing right before the next session. So part of it was just seeing that the timing of the work wasn't going, once we got into it, wasn't going to be done at the end of the session, but that it was going to take up until the beginning of the next session to be done. So there hasn't been a delay in the work, certainly not on the Washington side. It's really more an issue of the timing as to when that work was going to occur. So Siegel has been working with the Joint Transportation Committee. There hasn't been any delays as far as from the Washington side. And Steve has been doing the work as contracted. But it really, I should have brought forth that work was going to need through the end of January to be completed.
So if I understand, I think I saw you said that there's $99,000 in remaining contract authority, if I read that correctly. So I thought it was originally a $200,000 contract. Is that correct?
Right, exactly.
So about half of it's been used so far. It seems like far more than half of the work has been done. Am I correct there, or is
so
we expect all the rest to be used or not?
No, that's a good point. So we haven't been working with the Oregon side yet. So that budget authority was budgeted planned work for the Oregon side, which hasn't come to fruition.
So are we on schedule budget? What I mean, dollar wise, do you think, or are we overspending?
No, I anticipate. Well, I mean, theoretically, what I see happening in the next few months is that we will be on track on the Washington side, but we may need to reassess how much money is going to be needed to get through the Oregon process. So one example that I see happening is that this current phase that we're in actually finishes up with a unused balance. And there be a new contract that is created based upon the bi-state working group talking with Siegel about what the next phase would look like, especially if the Oregon process gets pushed into the next calendar year a bit.
So Kevin, are you saying we have about 100,000 left, 99, and we would be continuing to contract with Steve Siegel for another, basically through the end of the year, a few more months, but he would not be using up the full 99 during that period of time. Is that am I correct?
At this point, yeah, because he hasn't been working with the Oregon side. If for some reason we are open that back up, then we'll need to bring a change of scope to the bi-state working group, because it's unclear really at this point, how long it's going to take to get the Oregon legislation up and running. We were initially thinking it would be happening during this current time, and it's not.
So is the 99 our budget that we have for that work, or is the 99 the contract budget that we had with him to get the work done?
The $99,000 is money that was coming from House Bill 2017. So it was remaining funds from the House Bill 2017 contracted with Steve Siegel to complete the draft legislation for Oregon and Washington. So if the work's not
Okay.
if the work's not done, then he's not going to be billing us for it.
Oh, okay. All right. I get it.
So my recommendation is that there not be any additional budget authority, but that the term is extended to the end of January so that Steve can continue to work with the Joint Transportation Committee in Washington and continue to work on that. Well, we monitor what the activity on the Oregon side is, and if for some reason he gets called into action, once we find out who's willing to carry a bill forward, then we'll reassess that budget authority at that time.
If we extend this contract till the end of the year, how much right now do you anticipate that he would use of that 99?
Yeah, I would say it's probably, I'd say 40, probably 40,000. So I think there's probably 50 plus that wouldn't be used or would be used for the Oregon process if it was matched up with the Washington side.
I feel hesitation in the room. That's all I'm going to say.
I guess I'm uncomfortable, but I feel like I entered this process too late, and I would not stick myself in the way of of this, given that decisions were made long before I got here.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I feel the same way as Arthur does. But I think we've got a good clean break at the end of the year, or when he finishes the Washington component of it. Then we come back as a group and say, how do we want to proceed? But I think we're kind of locked into this guy to finish it, at least on the Washington side, and then we can say timeout.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, Mayor Barnes, Commissioner Anderson.
I'm good with it.
Same here.
All right, thank you. All right, so I do want to give some time to Brendan Comboy, who has been waiting patiently. Hi, Brendan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Brendan is the new white salmon planner, and this item was recommended to be included today by Mayor Keithler. And so Brendan, you had a fairly lengthy memo, and we are over 2 hours on this meeting. So take it away and take everybody's time into consideration, please.
Yeah, I'm going to be as quick as possible for you all. Thank you. 1 second here. Get this shared screen going. So thank you for that introduction. Like Kevin was saying, I'm the new city planner for White Salmon. This is just maybe plan B or plan C for you guys to consider as you move forward. I've been thinking a lot about this bridge the past 2 months, when I heard it was being replaced, in light of some other, endeavors that other places have done to kind of adaptively reuse historic structures. And so kind of have this idea I'm working with the Columbia River footbridge, taking into account the history of the bridge. It was built in 1924, as we all know. It's been modified over the years. It's been adapted to the landscape in continuous service. The Port of Hood River took it over in the 50s, and they modified the structure and painted it green, added the metal railing. And so as we're aware, the draft AIS points out the reasoning for why we need to get rid of the bridge, citing the present capacity, future transportation demand, lack of bicycle facilities, the safety of the bridge in terms of structural, seismic, river navigation, social demands in terms of trucking, House Bill 2017, Keep Oregon Moving, as I said, river navigation and seismic concerns. Those are all valid concerns if we're thinking about the bridge being rehabilitated for continued use for automotive and trucking traffic. It's a lot less of a lift structurally to reinforce the bridge if it's just for people and occasional emergency vehicles. And so the solution that I'm pitching here is that, the primary issues are the structural concerns of the bridge and, the width and height of this, river navigational channel. The proposal to take out that central span portion with a just pedestrian connection here and keep some of the elements that are of the historic bridge just for people and bikes could solve that issue. And you would have 2 navigational channels if the bridges are aligned in close proximity for ships to go under. In addition, you could have your bike lanes right down the middle and walkways on both sides with, rest areas and platforms. Ideally, this situation works much better under the EC3 situation because it separates the bridge from the footbridge much more intentionally. I'd just like to talk real briefly about a case study that has established this as a viable endeavor to pursue. And so this is a picture of the Poughkeepsie River Bridge. Poughkeepsie, New York. It was built in 1888. It's a steel truss bridge. At the time, it was the longest steel truss bridge built in the world. Today, it has the distinction of being the longest pedestrian bridge in the world. It crosses the Hudson River. In 2009, it opened up to the public, but it was basically inoperable since 1974 when a fire, just left it this eyesore in the community. And so a group of local citizens came together and they formed a nonprofit. They raised the money and they conveyed the structure to the New York State Bridge Authority, who came in and did the actual work. But they raised money through all various sorts of grants and other measures. They also added a 21-story elevator that connects to right downtown, so it's ADA accessible. It's extremely popular for a whole set of different user groups, all times of the year. I went there in June on a rainy Friday afternoon, and it was packed, absolutely packed. And it's a very similar analogy to what we have going here. They have 2 bridges as well. Granted, they're much larger and they have a larger river channel, but they have the connections on both bridges, and one's a primary pedestrian bridge. So they've created this walkway loop trail that's really neat, utilizing both bridges. And they have this branded identity as walkway over the Hudson. And what's really neat about some of the economic impact studies that they've done is that 5 million people have come to this bridge. They get 600,000 distinct visitors every year, spending an average of $64 each, $65, $25 million to the region in increased sales per year. It created 383 jobs, $9.4 million in wages, and there's a lot of local pride in the walkway. There's businesses that have adopted the imagery and the name, really cool. So it's also used heavily by locals, as repeat visitors, more than 20 times. And a majority come and when they do, they spend money at local restaurants and they spend it retail and elsewhere. I'm not going to go through all these, it's all in the report, but the quality of life is just as important in my mind as the economic impacts of the region. If you look at, 94% of Hudson Valley business owners believe the walkway has made a positive impact on the quality of life. I mean, that's huge. And most people say it's huge. And, 88% of nonprofits raise more money when they have an event out there. And what's really neat is, the majority of people are going there with someone else. They're not going there alone. So it's this social kind of civic space that is used by the community as like a third space or third place, social infrastructure. And it's a place for the community to come and interact, unwind, exercise. It's a lot more than just a sidewalk on the side of a bridge. And they go through all the different reasons they're visiting. Regulars go there 72% of the time to work out. They go for the views, all sorts of reasons. So those diverse user groups spread that economic impact broadly across the community because they're coming for different reasons. It could be the history buff, it could be the recreationist, it could be the person interested in, the river or whatever. It doesn't matter where there's an event there. So in terms of potential funding, what happened with, Walkway over the Columbia, one of the, big things that they realized at the time was that the cost of taking the bridge apart and destroying it, demolishing it, was pretty marginal in comparison to actually just rehabbing it and putting a walkway there. And when they started, they really weren't even intending to create this, destination. It was just to save the structure, and then they had this added benefit of a walkway, and it turned into this like runaway economic development success. So right now there's a lot of similar projects that are happening because everyone is realizing, the benefits of having these kind of civic space structures. Tillicum Crossing in Portland is a really good example of a recent one that has been an amazing success. The High Line is pretty popular, but all of these, I'd say about half of them are currently under construction right now because this is the current trend in planning. It's identifying, spaces for people that are not just, places to spend money necessarily, but to get out and enjoy the nature around them. So the recommendations, that are outlined in that report basically is just, all I'm asking for is an economic and fiscal impact study to say, what would the impact be of this bridge conserved versus getting rid of it, and just that. And that's all I'm asking. And if it comes back as nil, then we don't have to worry about it. And maybe if I'm really interested in what Commissioner Fox has said about, this, the more information about what actually needs to be done to the bridge in terms of shoring it up, because if it is, a marginal cost in terms of tearing it down versus shoring it up and doing that central span, I think it's very reasonable to pursue further. And so with that, I know it's 4:25, and so I won't take up any more of your time, but happy to answer any questions. And just like I said, keep it in your back pocket as a possibility. So with that, I'll stop my share.
Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate it. Any questions for Brendan? Yeah, Mike, unmute.
Hey, Brendan, I want to congratulate you on a very interesting presentation that you've made in the package. It's evident that you've put some passion into this, and I think you got a really intriguing story here. There's a couple of things I really like about it, and then there's a couple of things that, I don't know how this would really work, but maybe. What I liked about it is saving the iconic bridge, and there's a lot of history in the valley on that, and it's kind of a cool looking bridge the way I look at it. On the and if we did this, then maybe we could narrow up the concrete bridge, the new one, possibly. That creates a whole bunch of interesting chores that we've got to go do, and very quickly. The other thing that comes to my mind is barge traffic, the way the two bridges would be laid out. I think, and Kevin can better address this, the piers on the proposed new bridge are aligned where it makes transferring barges and so on much easier than the current bridge. It's my understanding there's a couple of hooks that they have to make getting under this bridge, which makes it challenging and risk prone. The other thing that would come to mind is the state of the bridge itself. We can show you pictures where we know we've got structural problems on the bridge. And you solved one of them by taking out the lift span. But there's a lot of other challenges that I see. Now, the weight would go way, way down, but you still have to be worried about the integrity of the bridge long-term. And lastly, trying to figure out how would we fund maintenance of this thing long-term? Now, instead of having one bridge, we would have two bridges, and I would think the current bridge is going to cost more to try and maintain than the new one, especially for the first 5 or 10 years. But I applaud you for bringing it forward. This is kind of the out of box thinking that I think we got to have. So.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And, I did try to identify some funding avenues in terms of like a paid parking situation to capture some of the 26,000 cars that go by I-84 every day. They can pull over, pay $5. They can ride a trolley into town, trolley up to White Salmon, and they don't touch a car once and they can spend their money. But yeah, just something to think about, but I appreciate your thoughts as well.
Can I make a comment really quick?
Yeah.
Kind of paralleling with Mike, it's my understanding from working with the barge drivers or the tugboat drivers, that I believe that this is the most challenging navigation section of the Columbia for the barge traffic. So I'm not sure how that would go over with the Coast Guard and the waterway people. One idea though is would this cross, what if it wasn't a full crossing? What if it was, what if we were able to leave several piers out, have the bridge extend partway into the water and have it be an out and back? But I understand what you're saying, that it would be really nice to be able to have the iconic bridge remain and the people go across. I just think we really have to be cognizant of the state that the bridge is in right now, and also the waterway access for people.
Thanks, Christy.
So my recollection from the EIS process was in talking to tribes and talking to environmental folks, one of the big things that excites them about the bridge replacement is removing piers from the water. So removing obstructions to river flow, to fish, and then a navigational obstruction of removing the central span and the narrowness of all of that. So it would be helpful. You had an ask for us on the last slide, and unfortunately it went up really quick and I didn't get it. But one note that I had in my head was that what's missing from that list was an environmental, I don't want to say environmental impact because I don't want to make it too big a deal, but are there fatal flaws from an environmental point of view in this proposal? So that would make sense to add that to that ask, those bullet points you had.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. I also was thinking about that too, and it's something I'd like to explore more in terms of what's the impact of ripping out all those piers to the benthic habitat and stuff moving forward. So yeah, I'm not sure. Look at that.
This is Commissioner Anderson. The one fatal flaw I'm seeing is that the information I've seen from the port is, yeah, we're looking at like 7 years out, repainting the bridge is going to be upwards of $30 million. I don't think parking fees are ever going to cover that for people walking or biking across that bridge. And whether you do it now and then you've got another 20 or 30 years before you paint it again, you're still going to have to pay that. That's the fatal flaw I'm seeing.
And that, Commissioner Anderson, that's kind of where I was on it. I mean, I just love the idea of keeping it. And if money was absolutely no object for us or government entities or the public, I would say, let's figure out some way we can do this, because I love the idea. But, do we want to add that to the tolls or the money that we have to try and procure? That just feels like a really huge obstacle. But I love the idea. I mean, I love what you came up with, but I agree with Commissioner Anderson on that point.
With that being said though, Brendan, we've got that park, for the city of white salmon down there. And we may be able to keep, a piece of it to go out there as a looking platform and then also to cross over the railroad tracks to get down to that park. And that's something I think that would make a lot more sense.
I was just going to bring that up, Jacob. Mayor Poucher really had that in mind many years ago, and he had described that quite well. And it seemed like a really exciting chance to save some history at a minimum. So I hope there's sort of a plan A and a plan B to this. That if for some reason the big plan gets shot down, I hope we can still work on a smaller plan.
Yeah, and that still has been what we've been discussing with Kevin and wanting to make sure stays in that conversation of how the current bridge can be repurposed into that access point for the riverfront. I think there's a lot of intriguing or interesting things I think about this idea, and really I felt like it made sense to bring it forward as a presentation, mainly on the heels of that last call that we had regarding the Section 106 and some of the mitigation efforts that were thrown out in that call, and sensing, especially from some agencies, that there was this desire to see a little bit more thought put into what it would look like to possibly preserve the bridge. And so thinking perhaps there was an inroad there of interest in exploring this. And, like Brendan said, obviously there's a lot of steps to still flush out and see if it actually is viable. But I thought that what has been presented to this point at least built a picture of imagining how it could go forward if the right things fall into place.
So as some of you know, I'm on the Columbia River Highway Advisory Committee, so I'm kind of work with this historic preservation side of things a lot. So Brendan, I'd be happy to spend some time with you to look at some of the details and kind of maybe to help you put a little bit of meat together on. I don't know why we keep using the meat analogy in this meeting, but put a little more substance behind this, and maybe do a little bit of throwing some of the critical failure analysis questions at you, and seeing if we can anticipate some of those a little bit better.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate your time and very thoughtful presentation. Appreciate
Thank you all thank you, Kevin. Thank you for giving me the time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I know we're almost another hour past what we were hoping for, but I think this was all very, very helpful. I'll get this video up on the YouTube video channel and prepare some notes and some takeaways. So thank you all, and I'll be in touch shortly.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.